Okay. All right, folks. So it is about to be 1:02 p.m., which is close enough. So people are going to be coming in and out. You can, if you don't feel comfortable like speaking up and chiming in, you can write it in the chat. Just keep in mind it's going to take me a second to get in that chat. And so basically, if you want to talk, just go ahead and unmute your microphone and it will basically let you chat to the group. So this mentor chat is about corrections. So if you don't know what a correction is, it is when you write a piece, or in my case, if you were to do a video and it gets published, it goes through the editorial process, gets published, but then there's then you become aware that there's something that could be wrong with your piece. Most of the time for scientific journalism, and in case of an NPR, this is a scientific inaccuracy. It's not because somebody doesn't like the way that you wrote something. It's like you either have something completely wrong or you're misrepresenting something. And so what happens then is that you, as a reporter, kind of have to scramble to figure out what's wrong with the piece, if there is something really wrong with the piece, or if somebody's just making something up because they have a special interest. And then if there is something wrong, then you rewrite part of the piece that's incorrect. And in NPR's case, and in a lot of different places, on the piece it will say, this piece originally said this, it was wrong because of this, and now it says this. And so it doesn't feel good. It's not a very good feeling. And Katie Wu had something happen kind of similar when it was a piece that actually went through office hours that she wrote for Vox that created kind of an uproar on Twitter. But I'll let Katie talk about all that. And so Katie's going to talk to you guys a little bit about what happened and what she had to do. And Joe and I also, who have both had to write corrections in our piece, can also talk a little bit about that. So Katie, do you want to just give us like a quick overview of what went down with your piece, and then we'll open it up for people to ask you questions?
Sure. First off, thanks for asking me to do this. This is terrifying, but I'm glad to be sharing my experience, and I hope it's something that everyone can learn from as I did. So basically, as Maddie said, I wrote a piece for office hours. It went through all the normal edits. It was a piece on the pseudopenis, that is a phenomenon in the female hyena, the female spotted hyena. And I sort of used that phenomenon as a jumping off point to discuss feminism as it relates to human culture. And I won't go into all the intricacies of the piece, but it did involve, a discussion of human culture through the lens of wildlife biological attributes. And it also had a great deal of discussion on the hyena social structure. And so after I published this piece, someone at the Hyena Project, which is just a website that you can Google, one of the scientists there posted on Twitter that it was like the worst article he'd seen on the subject in quite a long time. And he posted links to two, I think, partially affiliated blog posts, one on The Stranger and one on someone's personal blog that attacked the piece. And no one had contacted us about this. They had just sort of written pieces to tear apart my piece. And there was a big uproar on Twitter. People started tweeting at me, not only saying that I was wrong, but also that I was like an evil person. I got compared to Trump a lot, which is really interesting. People were like personally attacking me and saying I was like ugly and stupid and disgusting. It got like very personal very quickly, super unprofessional, of course, but my bigger concern was that people were saying that there were factual inaccuracies with the piece. And of course, one of the original people to say something was saying that he was a hyena scientist himself. So I think my editor at Vox, as well as Joe and Maddie, were of course concerned because we didn't want there to be an issue with this piece. It's important to put all the correct facts out there. So what I ended up doing was reaching out to the person who had first sent that tweet and saying, hey, it seems like you have an issue with this piece. I would really like to hear what's going on. Please tell me, and if we need to issue a correction, if we need to update the article to reflect the most scientifically accurate information, please let me know, and I would like to do that. He responded and basically said, well, there are some issues. He didn't go into them. He just said there are some issues, but I think the biggest problem here is that you're anthropomorphizing and using animal characteristics to comment on uh, a phenomenon in human culture, and or the reverse. You're attributing human feelings and thoughts to other animals, which is uh, to him a no-no. And I wrote him back, sort of pushing him to give me primary sources in the literature, and he never responded. I wrote him again and again saying, can you please point out these inaccuracies and let me know what's going on. I went on his website, thehyenaproject.com, and I said, here's something that contradicts one of the blog posts you cited. Can you tell me what is actually the consensus in literature? If there isn't consensus, can we figure this out? And, the blog post had pointed out many, many things that I was only able to find backing for, I think, 3 things total. Mostly they were clarifications, like, for instance, hyena society is generally a matriarchy, but some people take issue with that term because there's some evidence that like males are differentially integrated into the social structure depending on the subpopulation in what part of Africa. So many of them were clarifications, but I spoke to my editor. It was a long process. I ended up contacting 3 other hyena experts to help me find primary literature to link to clarify these things. And then we posted 2 corrections that are now on the Vox piece. And like Maddie said, there was a note at the bottom saying that this article incorrectly misstated or did not acknowledge this intricacy that is a part of hyena society, or there was one that said there's not yet consensus in the literature about this aspect that I commented on. I see there's a question about reading the article somewhere. I think Maddie linked to it in her very first email about this mentor chat. But I'm sure if you Google Vox hyena, you will see not only the article, but many lovely things said about me.
Yeah, if you go back to the original, email that I sent about the mentor chat, it was in that original email. But like I said, I would actually encourage you guys to go to just to Google Catherine Wu Vox hyena, because that'll also pull up the Stranger article, which is like out of a Seattle-based newspaper or something, that they wrote a piece in response to Katie's piece. So there you go. Thank you, Justin. And I'll link the Stranger article in there too. That was about that. So I guess I think one of the things that is really hard to deal with this kind of correction is that there was one person that has expertise, right? The Hyena Project person that originally said, like, this is the worst piece of rating I've heard about the Society of Hyena Culture, blah, blah, blah. Which pretty much indicates that, I mean, he didn't reach out to Vox. I guess that's not his responsibility, but it was clear that it was, I think from our standpoint, pretty early on, that the people that jumped on and was like, this is terrible, or like, I guess when you're writing about feminism, you don't have to be accurate, and that kind of stuff, none of those things are really coming from actual scientists. So I think one of the hardest things for Katie and one of the hardest things for people is that these things get like picked up really quickly, right? And then there's, like 45 retweets. And like you said, like, people are coming after Katie and saying like, oh, this sounds like you were brought up in the 50s. And, it was like a pretty good example. Thank you, Katie. I bet you appreciated being an example, a pretty good example of one thing that could be clarified that got blown into this, like, Vox is fake news and this person doesn't care about being accurate, which when in reality, I mean, I know Katie okay, and I know all of our scientists, you're not trying to be inaccurate. And it was also an opinion piece. So it was a very weird spot to be in as far as, how much of this is coming from people that are going to be screaming about all feminist articles? How much of this do you really need to correct because it's an opinion piece? It wasn't necessarily supposed to be like a review on hyena culture, but what Katie ended up focusing on is, are there scientific inaccuracies in my piece, which is what you guys need to focus on. Because like Joe said, it could be just one special, like one group that has a special interest coming after you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be all about the actual piece itself. I don't know, Joe, if you want to say something more.
Yeah, I do actually, because I have a copy of the, I want to make it clear that this is not a correction. And I'll just read the statement at the bottom of the page, because I've had corrections and this is not a correction. It says, update June 27th. This story has been updated to clarify that there are some differences between hyena populations when it comes to siblicide and males leaving the clans they're born into. It also now includes more nuance on males' place in the hierarchy. Now, that is not a correction. A correction is you incorrectly stated the number of the average number of offspring that hyena have, or you incorrectly stated, you know, the known experience with hyena culture. This is nuance and this is clarification, and I don't even feel that this gets to the level of correction, and that's why I feel, I mean, when I was on vacation, I was in Slovenia when all this was going down, but the bits and pieces that I read coming across email, and even hearing the discussion today, makes me really want to emphasize that corrections are different from clarifications. I mean, the idea that there are going to be people who disagree with some nuance or some way you phrase something, of course there's always going to be that. So I've felt all along that Katie was on firm ground, and that she didn't, I mean, you know, Maddie's, we're calling this a correction, and we should talk about corrections and what happens. But what I encourage her to do, and what I'm pleased about in reading this, is stand your ground. I mean, editors, or there's a sort of a duck and cover mode that comes in, because nobody wants to be criticized, and no editor wants to be told you let in a piece that was completely wrong. And I was pretty sure that that was not the case in this story, and it wasn't. So we could talk about what corrections are and what issues are, but this is again the difference between journalism and popular communication and scientific communication, because you're not walking into a group of ethnologists and making this argument, or animal behaviorists, or you're walking into the public, and the accuracy level, the specificity level, let's say, is different. The other thing that really got me annoyed by all this is it was an opinion piece. It wasn't a piece about hyenas. It was a piece about Katie's thoughts and feelings about female hierarchy and dominance in society and acceptability. And I mean, you know, you don't like the opinion, don't read it. But I was feeling very aggrieved that people were accusing her of doing a bad job, because I didn't think she did. And everything that's happened since convinced me that she didn't do a bad job. So that's one of the hardest things. I mean, you know, your first thing, your blood runs cold and you think, oh my gosh, what did I do? I must have screwed up. And you go and check everything, and you come back and you say, no, well, that's, I mean, the example I will give you, and it's probably true, but I talked about a drug called Prealt, and it's derived from a protein in cone snail venom, and the reason, and it's a potent analgesic, very potent, non-opioid, and the reason it hasn't been successful is that, or very successful, is that it's can't cross the blood-brain barrier, and so you have to deliver it intrathecally, which means injecting it into the spinal column. And so I said that, and somebody, or spinal cord, I might have said, and somebody said, well, it's actually, you injected it to the subarachnoid area of the spinal column. And I was thinking, look, I'm not planning to administer this to anybody. You know, when you get a shot in the arm, it's not a shot in the deltoid muscle, it's a shot in the arm. So you don't want to get it wrong if you're talking to a bunch of medical students. You want to be that specific, but if you're talking to the public, it's not wrong in the wrongest sense of wrong. Anyway, so that was the message I wanted to convey.
I mean, Katie, did you have, I mean, there was something in there that was, I guess, a clarification in the way that you weren't representing it correctly. So is that why, I mean, does Vox consider it a correction?
Yeah, so I mean, I was not, I had no say in the wording at the clarification or correction at the bottom of the piece, whatever it's termed. I did think there was one thing that probably could have warranted the categorization of correction, which is what I originally said, that siblicide in hyena litters can be common and that it can occur as a result of dominance displays between male and female pups. And it turns out that this was the consensus in the literature until a few years ago. And I hadn't seen the second paper, which is why this happened. But a second paper came out from the same scientists actually saying that we were originally wrong. It seems that dominance doesn't usually motivate this kind of behavior. It's usually if the pups are all really hungry and there's not enough food to go around.
Gotcha.
So
there was one bit that we could consider a correction, but like Joe said, the majority of it wasn't necessarily what we would consider like a classical correction, like you got a species wrong or something like that.
Right. I mean, I did my best to find anything that could prove either what I was saying or what the other person was saying. My biggest beef with this situation was that it seemed like, you know, when I pushed back and I asked him to give me sources for what he felt should be corrections, he couldn't come up with anything. And, you know, he was still posting on Twitter. It's not like he died.
Yeah.
He was still online and checking his email. He just didn't respond to me. And I can't necessarily speculate why, but it doesn't look very good for him that he had all these issues but couldn't actually back them up. And I couldn't find any backing from other scientists I interviewed either. That being said, you know, I think it was valuable still that, you know, through all that junk, there were a couple things that were worth clarifying. But
what do you think you could have done? I mean, like looking back on it with hindsight, is there something that you think you could have done that would have avoided this kind of like outburst from the community? Or do you think that writing this kind of piece in that angle would have, you know, there was no hope for getting away with, you know?
I think, you know, I admit that, you know, I made mistakes, right? Like I didn't find that second paper. That's a big, you know, mishap on my part. And if I had interviewed more experts, I only interviewed one.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I maybe would have caught, but I also don't think that I would have had the foresight to like fact check every line of my piece with an expert had I interviewed them. That being said, like the fact that one big issue people took with the piece was anthropomorphism. I imagine somebody in the field could have warned me, man, you are opening the biggest can of worms. I wasn't naive enough to think that writing a piece about something this polarizing wasn't going to raise a few hackles somewhere in the community, especially in the Twitterverse where people love to hate other people. Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize that it was such a contentious subject within the field, especially considering that this is not the first time someone has written about the hyena pseudopenis or matriarchal societies in the animal kingdom that can have bearing on human society.
Yeah, that was my takeaway. So one thing that I have started to do, you know, NPR has a very clear policy that you have to reach out to at least one expert in the field and then one expert that's in the field that's not a part of the paper whatsoever. And that you can, you know, like if I'm covering something, I send them the paper and I ask them, you know, what do you think about this? A really easy way to do that is to go through the references of the paper and make sure that you're still within your field. But for the hyena piece, I'm wondering, you know, if you talk to 2 or 3 people just about the hyena culture, if, like you said, somebody's going to, because it kind of felt like people were waiting for this piece to come out. You know what I mean? I don't know how to say it like other than that. I think that a lot of people in any society that has this, like studying any biological organism that has something that people can use to talk about our own society, I think that a lot of people are really hesitant about that, especially as biologists. They want you to be paying attention to hyenas, not because what you can, you know, use to study or use to say about our society, but because they're an important organism, that kind of stuff. So, you know, I'm wondering if talking to a couple of people just to get kind of a feel for the field, which is what Joe and I do a lot, helps quite a bit. But it's a polarizing topic. It was going to have some kickback. I'm just wondering if you could have been at least a little bit more aware of what you were walking into just by talking to a couple more people.
I definitely think I could. And one thing I will say is I got a little bit unlucky. As I was reading a lot of different papers, I reached out to 3 different authors of these papers. And I reached out to 4 people in total. The 4th person I did get a quote from, and we spoke a lot about the article, and her quote is the one that ended up making it in. The other 3 either never responded to me or said, I'm in Africa for the next month and a half, and I can't talk to you. And then I sort of gave up after I got that one quote from the person. But I think having at least 2 people weigh in on your piece, even if you're not covering a specific study, is really important just to get a variety of opinions, because you never know who you're going to end up calling. You know, the other side of that, I don't know, whatever it is I'm saying, the other side of that is the one person who attacked me, who was a hyena researcher. He has a reputation of being very vocal, clearly. And, you know, for instance, like the people who interviewed him interviewed only him. And I think that's a challenging thing for them. Like both the articles ended up on opposite ends of the spectrum because they, by virtue, just did not have a breadth of opinion from the field. And that's super important.
Yeah, cool. Does anybody have, and I noticed all of you have put on, besides Helen, I see you, Helen, full ghost mode. Does anybody want to come out of ghost mode and ask Katie a question? Anybody? Really? I know that there are like 15 of you just creeping around. Anybody?
Ask me anything. I have nothing to hide.
Ask Katie about how it felt. She loves bringing that up again. Let's put her back in that space. Guys. Yeah. Irina, is that you? I see you popping up.
Sure, I'll ask. Katie, how did it feel? I mean, no, first, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And this, I'll be honest, this is something that freaks me out a lot about going into something like journalism, because as a scientist or like as a grad student, you know, it's easy to stay in your hole, publish a paper every now and then, maybe interact with the community, but then like you generally don't have to deal with people and their feelings. And the idea that in journalism you're opening yourself up to like criticism can be really daunting. So how are you dealing with all of this?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think a lot of what happened at first was really, really, really awful. That was one of the worst weeks of my life, because every time I opened up Twitter, I saw something new about how horrible of a person I was, or how horrible of a science communicator I was, or like weird random stuff like she must be a vampire. And it was like, okay, that's just whatever. But you know, it all hurt. I am human, and that was really, really shitty. But I'm proud that I decided that what I was going to do was not just wallow or like write something really inflammatory back on Twitter, because if I had done that, I think things would have gotten much worse, especially if I had just let all my emotions pour out in those first few hours where they were completely unchecked. But I decided, okay, is there any basis to this? And honestly, I came out the other side very grateful that I did that, because I realized most of these things were motivated by distaste for my opinion and not distaste for facts. That being said, the highs and lows of science journalism are, if you can believe it, even more extreme than the highs and lows of science. It's really, really, really great to hear a compliment about a piece you've written. It's so awful to hear that you've gotten something wrong, or that you've done a bad job, or that people think you suck as a writer, because writing is just by nature of writing more precious than pipetting or analyzing data or like graphing something in Prism. And I think that's really worth considering. But, you know, at the same time, we can't be so precious with our writing that we can't acknowledge when we get it wrong. So it was awful. And when I think about it now, it's still like a little bit traumatizing for me, to be honest. But I channeled as much of that as I could into communicating with, all the important people, Joe, Maddie, my editor, scientists who could actually give me perspective on this in a non-inflammatory manner. And I'm glad that I did that. I didn't let that emotional hangover hold me back from that.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with, and I can speak for Joe and I on this. Really impressed with the way that that Katie handled it. I mean, my instinct was like, Joe, I'm going on Twitter. I got to back up one of our scientists. I know she did her work. I'm going to come after them. This is part of science journalism. We're going to make this a learning opportunity for everybody. Also, I'm going to angry tweet at some people, and I've had 3 glasses of wine. And Joe is like, absolutely not, Maddie. Deactivate. I'm going to deactivate Twitter on your phone. And so I'm also interested, what I know that we did not, Joe and I on Joe's Big Idea did not say anything on Twitter. I mean, I don't know necessarily. NPR has a pretty strict policy on that, and we're an NPR linked account. But I would say that I'm interested what the people at Vox told you to do and what you ended up doing as far as on social media, because I think that that's something that, in this day and age is part of this kind of process.
We did say something on Twitter. We said how proud we were of what she did and got into Vox.
Yeah.
And we didn't not say that.
Right. Wait, but that was before the correction.
I understand, but I'm just saying we did say something positive, and we never felt we had to say anything negative.
Yeah. Katie, so what were the people, so just to clarify for everybody, we went through the office hours program, but in the office hours program, we edit it so that it's got a nice, nice flow and that kind of stuff. And then, Katie and I pitch on behalf of Katie to Vox, and Vox picks it up. And so Vox has the final edit. I'm interested in what Vox, who is the organization that this article came out of, what was their mindset and what did they say to you?
So I will say that the first person to bring this to my attention wasn't even me. I'm scared of Twitter. I'm now more scared of Twitter, but I've also, got like an okay relationship with Twitter right now. My editor emailed me and said, whoa, this is going down. What's going on? And that's what alerted me to the first thing. So my editor was very attentive the entire time. And she was like, well, if we need to issue a correction, that's what we're going to need to do. And ultimately, that was the only tangible product of this whole fiasco. I didn't write like a response blog post. I didn't, descend into the gaping maw of Twitter and like try to clap back, because it was too much. And I knew that if I got invested in that way, I would try to respond to like every single troll, and that was just not productive. I like emotionally puked at my editor in an email, which I don't know how I feel about, but I basically wrote her what I maybe would have responded if I had written my own blog post and said, like, line by line, this is why the stranger article is either deliberately misinterpreting something I said in my piece, or like they're making some really weird claim about something I need to correct that no one can actually find in the literature. Or I acknowledge, like, you know what, okay, that is one thing that I didn't say correctly the first time, and that's something we need to clarify. And this was all to my editor just so she had context. I feel like I could have published that somewhere because it is, a rebuttal of that takedown, but it didn't feel productive to me. Ultimately, what ended up at the bottom of the Vox piece was everything that needed to be said, what was updated in the article to portray the most accurate scientific information at the time. And that's all people really need to know. If they are seeing the piece for the first time, they don't need to read my emotional upheaval of like, I hate that this person attacked me, and like these are all the terrible things that they said in my piece. I think if they kind of follow the trail, they'll see that like Vox issued a very specific set of corrections or clarifications for a reason, and the rest of those things people can and should assume that they're not founded, which is why we did not correct them in the Vox piece. So hopefully that speaks for itself, but there were a lot of people saying on Twitter, like, no response from Vox. I guess this is like how they're, whatever it was that they were saying in attacking me or Vox.
That was really a frustrating, and it's it's a mixture of self-control, right? Because the thing that I found frustrating is like, oh, I guess this is how Vox handles their corrections. In reality, Katie was busting ass for like 4 or 5 days straight, trying to figure out, like literally like emailing me at weird hours of the night, Katie Wu. And so she was working to make that correction. So part of this challenge with science communication, and so part of the challenge with journalism, is that, you know, you are in the public eye. And so you have to sit there knowing that you're working. I mean, she's working all day at the Smithsonian and then also working on this and trying to do her best to correct it. All white people on Twitter are like, Vox doesn't care about the facts. And I guess Katie Wu, as a science communicator, doesn't care about the facts as long as it supports her feminist agenda. And in reality, you know, you're like working to try to get it right. And I will say that I agree with Katie as far as the ups and downs of science journalism are even more than the ups and downs of science, because I mean, especially like at NPR where millions of people are reading your things, it's like having a committee member, like a giant committee meeting, except for all of the committee meeting members are real shitty scientists, but they have a lot of things to say. So it is definitely a big high and a low, and you learned, and I'm sure you felt the same way. I've had a couple of corrections and the next pieces were very scary to publish, and you were very nervous that you're going to go through the same thing. And it makes you kind of shy away from doing things that might be, you know, easier to tear apart, or maybe shy away from opinion pieces, which is not what you should be doing. So I can just say that it was a kind of a really shitty situation that Katie had to deal with, but it's not a unique situation as far as science journalism goes, especially if you're writing an opinion piece. So those are things just to keep in mind. So question from the group. Becky, I see you staying in ghost mode. I'll allow it. Has this affected your plans to pursue science communication in general or certain types of stories? Any ideas for approaching topics that you know will rile some people up?
I'm actually really grateful for this question, because one of the best things to come out of this, so I'm doing a AAAS Mass Media Fellowship at Smithsonian Magazine this summer, and it's so far been one of the best experiences of my life. The unfortunate thing was, because this was on Twitter and it exploded quite as much as it did, a lot of people heard about it without me telling them, including a lot of people at work. And so the next morning, a few people came up to me and were like, hey, I saw the thing, which was, you know, like my heart dropped into my stomach when they said that. But then the next thing out of their mouths was, we're behind you. That was totally undeserved. The way they attacked you was wrong. Even if you did get something wrong in the article, there was no reason for them to personally attack you. And the summer is about you producing a lot of really great clips that don't have this kind of reaction, and you know, you're going to do a great job doing that, and let's just move on, because every science journalist goes through this process. Usually it's not this bad, and that's important. You know, usually a correction is going to be like, that statistic was wrong, or like you misspelled someone's name, or you accidentally put like African instead of American or something in your article somewhere, and that needs to be corrected. But like, usually that's not going to set people into this flying rage that happened here. So far this summer, I've produced, you know, a couple dozen other clips, and none of them have provoked the ire of the Twitterverse. And it feels really good to be able to bounce back with that. You know, your career does not come down to a single article, and everyone's going to go through something like this once. It sucks, but I'm so far, you know, really pushing myself to move past it and keep at this, because I love it. It's a pitfall of the job, but this just makes me more conscientious, and I'm going to try to make sure this never happens again. I still have opinions, and if I feel compelled to write an opinion piece again, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But you know, those are the pieces that you have to be especially careful about, especially, you know, when it's a controversial opinion. Try to find experts who agree with you and have the facts to back it up, because the combined voice of your journalistic integrity and an expert's opinion who thinks about the subject every day, that only helps you. And, you know, don't present only one side of the subject. If there's someone who disagrees, bring their opinion in and address it. That's something that's really important in an opinion piece, I think.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's just that, and it's like what they tell you in debate. I'm sure we were all in it because we were super cool, but that if you can, address the other side before the other side has a chance to come at you, that's one of the best things to do in an opinion piece. Or, I guess opinion isn't necessarily, that's not the truth for only opinion pieces, but, and I think that, like Katie said, if you are doing this at a level where, when I was like writing my podcast for WordPress, I wasn't getting a lot of feedback because it was just mostly my grandmother that was listening. So when you do this at a high level and you do this in a way that is pushing boundaries or, showing an opinion, you are going to have people come after your stuff no matter what. And you will get a correction at one point. Like, I think I remember one time I had somebody at UCD or like USD instead of like it was just like some little thing that just like slips through once and then it goes through your edits. It's going to happen. And I think that the fact that the first time this ever happened for you, Katie, had this kind of response is unfortunate in a lot of cases, but also will probably be one of the worst ones that you'll experience for a while. So, knowing
so
that
Twitter, Twitter, it's sort of like one needs general policies for if bad things happen, they're going to happen on Twitter, and what does one do about it?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know what was Vox's idea of. Did they give you any feedback whether or not they thought you should engage with people on Twitter or not, Katie, or was that just totally up to you?
I don't think we specifically discussed Twitter, honestly. And I know Vox never tweeted at anyone who was trolling the article. I feel like Twitter is this dark, twisty place where discussions will become quickly, they'll spiral out of control very quickly. Responding to one person, I feel like sets this expectation and precedent that you should respond to everyone, and you just can't do that. The same thing goes for comment sections on many articles for which you can comment. They certainly could have done something on Twitter, but I think, in my very small, humble opinion, I think it was right of them to not engage. Especially because it became very clear from the outset that most of the people commenting on Twitter had not read either my article or the rebuttal. But I'm bad at commenting on Twitter because I have never been a super active Twitter person. And I am curious, Maddie, if you have thoughts on, I guess, engaging in this verbal sparring on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, so NPR's policy is pretty much don't feed the trolls in any case. I do now work, in science video, and when people make comments on the Maddie About Science channel on YouTube or on Facebook, we have kind of a policy as far as, there are basically, I think that, and this is the Adam Cole school of thought. Adam Cole's a video person here, and he basically said if it's going to make it so that people that are following the comments are going to learn something from what you say back, then that's okay. And then that also that in many respects, there are people in the comments that'll kind of sort themselves out. So there will be people that come after you for a way that you represent something, and you can kind of wait a little bit of time and wait if somebody in the comments is going to go after the trolls and take care of them for you. But, if somebody's bringing up a legitimate concern, like about a science video, like about, you said that the common cold can fly this far, but it's really only in this level of human environments. And I can comment with some scientific explanation or some facts or something that we can back up through a scientific way and just say hey, thanks for bringing this up. But, essentially you're wrong because of this. And then if people are going to learn from that experience, then we will engage with them. If it's somebody who's just, it completely depends on the language. It completely depends on the affect of it. Whether or not we engage, but really our mindset, and this is not on Twitter, this is on a comment section, is that if somebody's bringing up a good point or a hole in the piece, especially if, you know, we are kind of predicting that that might happen, we will engage with them in like a super respectful way. And it's kind of a kill them with kindness kind of vibe. So if somebody's like, you idiots didn't even think about this. And we're like, actually, thanks for your comment. We did think about this and this, and this, and this, and then you're out of there. That's kind of the way that we go with it. Now, on social media, we are pretty hesitant at NPR to engage with people that are clearly like coming through with some like righteous anger. And especially in this case where we would have been commenting on behalf of another publication, it was kind of like we're not gonna touch this. Now, that being said, I've thought about saying like, you know, about reposting your story and talking about it a little bit, but we haven't really decided what we're going to do with on that. I mean, it's always a good idea, I think, to not react with like to wait, you know, like that's the kind of like for all life thing is just to, if you're feeling emotional or upset, like my reaction was to defend you on Twitter immediately. And then Joe was like, I'm going to take your Twitter accounts away. And then I waited on it and thought about it the next day and did not do anything. I think I definitely felt a little bit different because it was on behalf of you. Like if somebody was attacking me, I'd be like, okay, whatever, fuck those guys. But I did feel like a level of like Fajobi Queen protectiveness and I wanted to go after them. But like you said, is that actually going to be productive? And is that going to lead to more people knowing the facts or knowing where your position came from? Probably not. What else? Go ahead.
One thing that I think is worth mentioning is this did not set any of the important relationships for me on fire. Like Maddie and Joe did not nail me to a wall and like ream me out. I mean, Joe did say very early on, and I think he was right to do so, like, if you screwed up, like, you need to issue a correction. That's a super important message from this. Like, if you screwed up, take responsibility, right? And I like to think that I did. Hopefully I did. Maybe not everyone sees it that way at this point, but that's an important takeaway from this. The second thing is, like, my editor at Vox actually called me a couple days later to reassure me that, like, she didn't hate me and she wasn't mad at me, and like this was a mess, but that wasn't necessarily my fault. And this happens, and more importantly, this happens often. And Vox is a place that often publishes very polarizing things, and they know that. They know what they're getting themselves into. So don't be afraid of reaching out to the people who are actually there to be on your side. Like, your editor is there to help you through this. Your editor is also there to help you avoid this. And I think, you know, my editor at Vox also acknowledged, like, this is a learning experience for me too. Like, what are some things that I can do in the future as an editor of pieces that are potentially as polarizing as this to make sure this doesn't happen to a publication again, to a writer again. So all things worth bringing up. If you're ever worried about the state of your piece or the things that you're saying in an article, bring it up. You know, better to nip that in the bud than learn like I did.
We have time for a couple more questions. Anybody? Eva, Emily, Helen? That's right. I can see all of you. Rachel? Who do we got? This is a human that has had to do the worst thing in the world, and she's going to give you her perspective on it. Not the worst thing in the world, but one of the worst things in science journalism life. So you guys, this is a good opportunity for you to pick her brain a little bit. Don't be scared.
I guess it depends where you publish. I had something, Origin of Life, on Live Science or something, and the criticisms, and it was 10 years ago. So the criticism, I think I also had some kind souls who said, this is just an idea, give her a break. But I guess it depends how public, you know, what the readership is of the place that you're publishing your thing.
Yeah, and I mean, Katie made a good point that that, you know, the Vox is kind of, and Joe even said this once too, Vox posts stuff like that on purpose, right? They're looking for they post provocative stuff. They're looking for a response. They're polarizing their audience for a reason. And so, you know, it's not necessarily, I will say that I don't believe this keeps Katie from publishing there again. I don't think that would ever have that experience. So that's something that you need to take from this, from Katie's experience, is that Katie had a really bad correction experience, and it still did not ruin her ability to even write for the publication that she had the correction. I'm sure of it. So, and I mean, and obviously it doesn't happen. I'm still here, and I've had multiple corrections, and ones that were because I wasn't being, like it was a cut and dry. Maddie screwed up, made a mistake, didn't interpret this part of the paper right, and I'm still here, and they pay me most of the time.
Well, we can put an end to that.
Okay, I don't like that. I can still see the puppet. Turn him farther away.
That was good.
Just have to learn. Anyway, I was going to say something, if that's all right. This is, I mean, it's just so. I just got another. While we were talking, I got a Twitter comment on a story I did about a guy who had come up with an idea for a topical pain cream based on resveratrol, because he is a pain researcher at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, and he had this idea that maybe that resveratrol topically applied in an analgesic cream would have benefit for peripheral chronic pain. Okay, that's a limited market. But the question that everybody had for me, including my editor, was, well, why are you talking about this? It hasn't been through clinical trial. It's not FDA approved. Well, it didn't have to be FDA approved because resveratrol is one of those generally recognized as safe compounds. But the point is, I guess, that the headline of the piece said, snake oil or helpful treatment, you decide. And people still came firing at me like, how could you publish this? And if you put snake oil in the headline, that's hardly saying I am endorsing this. It's just saying, here's an interesting story. And it didn't stop anybody. I mean, it really didn't stop anybody. Anybody who wanted to attack was still out there, and they still are. So, how much did I get paid for doing that? Nothing. Come on, give me a break. It's that area between, well, why are you doing it? I did it because I thought it was interesting. And I think that's the way I was looking at Katie's opinion piece. I mean, I read it and I thought, woof, that's going to get rile up some people, but good. I mean, that's what we're here for. Make them think. To give them the information, be accurate, but make them think. So anyway, I just, as Maddie says, these errors, some of them, it's just inevitable. It's just inevitable. And my goodness, there certainly are enough corrections in the scientific literature, and that's supposed to be double and triple checked and peer reviewed and all this other jazz. So, it's just kind of what happens. And yeah, I mean, if you screw up more often than you get it right, you're probably in the wrong profession. But if you never screw up, you probably are writing very boring stories. So.
Okay, so Sadie Wachowski in full ghost mode said, is this limited to Twitter, or did you get private messages about this as well?
Luckily, it was all Twitter. Actually, the first thing I did when I realized this was happening was I ran to my personal website and I took down as much contact information as I possibly could, because I was scared people were going to call me or find my home address or something and do something. That was probably overkill, but I'm glad I did that, because there are people who do find my email still now and say hey, you wrote this thing and I'm curious, should I be applying this thing to my skin to make my rash go away? And I'm I don't know. But yeah, it was all Twitter.
Okay, one more question from the group. I will allow some chatting. You may enter it via chat. One more question for Katie before she gets back to writing another awesome piece. Nobody? All right, I'm okay with that. I mean, I got work to do. All right, awesome. Well, if no one speaks up in the next 10 seconds while I wrap this up, Katie, you're off the hook. Thank you for talking about this. I know that you are super excited to relive the experience with a group of Fujobis asking questions. So I think that you did an awesome job. And I think that that this is an experience that you're going to learn from. And I appreciate you coming in and talking to us about it, because it's not easy to talk about. As you noticed, we did this whole thing, but Joe and I never talked about any of our corrections because we don't like it. So Katie Wu, we appreciate you. And I'm going to be posting this in the general channel if you missed anything. And anything else last minute? Last minute? We're doing it? Okay. Katie Wu, you're the best. I appreciate you.
I appreciate all of you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.